This is Avonelle Hawke's Oral History, Part 11. And first of all, we're going to talk about the trip that you and the family made to Europe
Oh, yes.
when we were living in Morocco. So talk about that.
Well, the Air Force, for every 2 years you served overseas with your family, gave you a 30-day leave to take a trip up to Europe from Africa. And so Dad planned our trip, and of course, as usual, he was.
Oh, the microphone.
Okay.
The microphone's partially covered.
Oh, it is?
Okay.
Okay.
So, okay, go ahead.
As usual, Dad planned a very meticulous itinerary for us, and so off we went, and we were flying up to Wiesbaden, Germany, to the big Heidelberg base there, and then we were going to take the car of friends of ours that were stationed at Heidelberg, the Ebes, and he had bought a new Jaguar, and Mary just hated it. But anyway, Bob let us take their old Studebaker that they had over there, and Dad had fixed it up while he was, every trip he made to Wiesbaden before this, put new tires on it, did all sorts of nice things to it, and off the five of us went in the Studebaker on a 30-day trip around Europe. And it was fabulous. We just had a wonderful time. Frank was 2.5, I think, at the time, but you two older boys were old enough to, I think, remember some of it. So we started out from Wiesbaden, drove through Heidelberg, and the first night we spent at Ulm, which was supposed to have the highest spire, I think, in Germany. And we spent the night in Ulm along the Inn River. And then the next day we went through Munich and up to Garmisch-Partenkirchen. And we spent 4 or 5 days in Garmisch. Beautiful. It was at the foot of the Alps. The Zugspitze was there. We went to the Zugspitze on a train above the clouds. It was exciting. And while we were in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, they had had Olympics there in the past. And in the big pavilion where they had the Olympics, they had later put a restaurant and a lovely floor that they could move and make it ice and have an ice show, and then they could move it, the dance floor, over it afterwards, which they did. So Dad and I went dancing that night, and you boys went with us and watched us, and we had a lovely dinner. Then from Garmisch, we went to, we would have liked to have gone to Berchtesgaden, but we didn't, we bypassed it. And we went to Oberammergau, and they had beautiful wood carvers there. And we took a tour of the Passion Play premises where they put on the Passion Play every 10 years? I don't remember. It was not being shown that year, but they took us on a tour of all of the stages and stuff that they did it on. And let's see, from there we went to the Black Forest and stayed in Baden-Baden. That was a beautiful spot, beautiful garden spot. A funny thing happened to me on that stop in Baden-Baden. I needed to get my hair done, so I made an appointment at a shop near the hotel, and they rinsed it in cognac. And I thought that was so funny. Why are you? Well, it'll make it shine, and oh, it just made my hair look so pretty. But that was kind of funny. And let's see.
Oh, so they rinsed it in cognac?
Yeah.
Okay.
At that time I had black hair with little streaks of gray in it. Am I missing something? We went to the Black Forest during that point in our trip. But I'm missing, did I miss Switzerland?
Well, yeah, we're still in Germany.
We're still in Germany. We drove up the Alps, I remember. That was quite a zoo trip up the Alps. And Dad stopped at one point near the top, near where we were, at the apex of where we were going to go. And you boys got out, and you were thirsty. So there was this little trickle stream coming down the mountain. And we have some pictures of you boys cupping your hands and getting some water. We went to St. Moritz. That was a fun stop, except that we broke the bellhop at the hotel broke our windshield. So that changed our itinerary a bit, and we had to go into Zurich, Switzerland, to get our windshield repaired.
How did you break it? Do you remember?
Yes, the straps on the, what do you call the bungee strap?
Bungee cord?
A bungee cord hit it.
Oh.
And I don't know why it hit it, whether it came loose from a bag or what, but it hit it and cracked it.
Did you have luggage being carried
on the top?
Okay, that was probably being held by a bungee cord. He probably unhooked one side and lost control of it, and it flipped around and hit.
Probably so.
Probably is my guess, yeah.
So, Dad, we were going to go to, well, I forget the next stop, but we were going to go to Lucerne, but we went to Zurich and had the windshield repaired. Didn't stay there long. Then we did go to Lucerne. That was a gorgeous place. Lake Lucerne is so beautiful. And we went by motorboat on Lake Lucerne. Why? Where did we go? I don't remember.
Probably just a tour on the lake.
Probably so. Anyway, that was fun. And then, let's see, we went from there to, could we have gone from there to Luxembourg? We went to Luxembourg, went to the memorial to the World War II soldiers. And we went through Trier into Luxembourg, I believe it was. Then we went to Belgium, to Brussels, stopped in Brussels, Belgium, and called Mom and Dad from there. Enjoyed our time in Brussels.
Why? Do you recall why? What did you see?
Well, the Grand Place was a very interesting center, plaza to walk around. And I don't know, it just seemed like I remember it being a fun, what was the little statue that's so famous, of the little boy urinating, making a fountain? I can't remember the name of the statue, but we went by that. And then we went into, we went to the spot where the colonel said nuts to the Germans when they wanted them to surrender. Colonel McAuliffe, I think was his name. Then we went to across the border into Holland, into the Netherlands. And what was our first stop in Netherlands? Oh, when we lived in Africa, we could only get reconstituted milk, and they didn't want us anything with milk in it for you to drink, for you boys to have, like ice cream, like our ice cream. So we stopped for lunch in Rotterdam, and the Air Force had told the families when they got into Holland, they were allowed to drink all the milk and have all the ice cream they wanted because their milk was safe. And so we went to lunch in Rotterdam, and I never saw people that looked more like Russian refugees when they were eating. You kids just loved having the milk. You loved the ice cream, and they had peach melbas for dessert. And you and your dad just absolutely wolfed it down. It was so funny. So we didn't see much I don't remember seeing too much actual anything in Rotterdam that stood out. But we drove from Rotterdam after lunch to Amsterdam, and we found a U.S. type motel about 10 miles out of town. So Dad had made reservations there, and we moved in for about a week. I think we stayed in Holland a week. We toured all over Amsterdam, and they had a diamond show there. I guess they were famous for it. And we went there one day, saw some gorgeous stones, some beautiful diamond stones there. And one day when we went in, we parked. They had in the center. They had a big cathedral, and in the side of the cathedral were some shops, and one of them was a little antiques shop, and Dad had parked right by it. So we went in, and there was no one else in the shop when the five of us were in it. Now, you little boys, all three were dressed in lederhosen and the little German hats, and Dad had a German hat on, and you had all those little pins that you collect when you go out. And pretty soon, from the back of the store, this real tall, real portly-looking man came out from that part of the store, and it ended up that he was the owner of the store, of the antique shop. And we were browsing around looking at all the antiques, and Dad had found a piece of that he wanted to buy, but it was always, well, what do you want? And he wasn't going to buy it. And so we were discussing it, Dad and I, while you boys were roaming around, and this man kept watching us for a few minutes. Pretty soon he approached us, and he looked at Dad and he said, "You looked German when you came in, but thank God you're not." Just like that. Hatred. The hatred was still there from World War II, from the invasion of Germany. So we went out to the car. I had bought an antique piece of silver. And we went out to the car, and Dad put the key in the ignition, but he didn't start it. He said, "I sure did like that bucket in there. Boy, I like that." And so we discussed it. And I think it was George spoke up and he said, "Go get it, Dad." And so he turned the ignition off, and he went in and he brought the bucket. And we had it all of our marriage. Let's see, we went to Edam and Volendam. We went to Madurodam. Do you remember that at all? That was a miniature city. And it was fascinating. All of the major tourist sites in Holland were in miniature there. You walked around the miniature city. George still remembers it and is fascinated by it. We went to Edam, Volendam, Madurodam. Oh, and then we went up to the North Sea, the beach, and walked along the beach. I picked up some seashells, and it was fun. It was a nice day. And then came back and drove back. How did we get back? Anyway, we got back to Wiesbaden. And just as we got back to Wiesbaden, the car stopped. I forget what happened to it, but it wouldn't run anymore. Dad said it knew just when to do it. We got back to Wiesbaden. So we got it fixed for the EBs. But we did take the EBs with us, or Mary and the boys, on a boat trip, a day trip. It was down the Rhine River. And I think we went from Wiesbaden as far as Cologne, and saw all the castles that were along the river. It was the Rhine River cruise. You know what I left out? Italy. I left out Italy. We went to Lugano and Locarno, Italy, and one of them was in Switzerland and one was in Italy. And we went along the Lake Como. We drove along Lake Como for quite a while, and stopped for lunch at a restaurant on the banks of Lake Como, and they had rides out on the lake, and so Dad booked a ride on these little what were those little? They were boats. I have pictures of you boys and myself on. They were real small, but we went out on the lake, and that was fun for you boys.
Were they self-propelled boats?
I think so.
Or we like pedal?
Yeah.
Those little pedal boats? Okay.
Yeah. We've got some pictures of you boys in that. And I forgot the trip that we made to Jenner, and we went up a ski lift and had refreshments or lunch up there at the top of the mountain, and then we took a walk along. I remember that walk, and I don't know why I had the nerve to do it. It was very narrow and it looked very dangerous to me, but we all took a walk along that, and you looked down on Kenigsee Lake. I think that was the name of it, Lake Kenigsee. And then we went in the salt mines at Jenner, and we looked like a bunch of refugees then. That was fun. You probably don't remember that either. You were too young. It's too bad. But we had to put, the pictures are funny. We had to put these black plastic or leather things on us, the front and back, because we were going to go on a slide down into the salt mine onto a lake. And I wasn't real thrilled about it when I heard about it, but I said, I'll go. I didn't want to miss anything. And then we had to put these caps on that looked like refugees, black caps to cover our head, top of our head. And down we went. And it was a slide. We went down the slide, and we ended up on this salt lake. It was a salt mine. And it was amazing, the feeling. You were suspended because it was salt in the water. I guess it's like the Dead Seas.
Yeah.
And so that was quite a trip. We enjoyed that. And what else did I miss?
Did you go to Austria?
Oh, we went to Austria. We went to Innsbruck, and we went to another, Salzburg. We spent the morning in Salzburg, and Dad took us up on a tram. This tram took us up the mountain to a cliff, and you could overlook the Brenner Pass. And the Brenner Pass was a pass that Dad flew over on his missions into Germany and Czechoslovakia in that area. So Dad stood there by a broken barrier that you stood behind, and he had you boys beside him, and he was pointing over toward the Brenner Pass and telling you that's where I flew some of my missions during World War II.
Yeah, he bombed targets in the Brenner Pass.
He did?
Yeah, he not only flew through it, but they actually bombed targets in the pass, yeah.
Yeah, and I think he said that he always received a lot of flack when he'd go through the pass. Yeah. So that was quite a memory for Dad, to point that out. Why did I miss all that when I was talking to you about it? Well, it was a month's trip, and I'm 98.
How about France? Did we go to France?
No.
Didn't Dad take you to Paris one time?
Yes, that was another trip.
Oh, okay.
That was another trip. Later, just before we left Africa. No, Dad was not a real fan of France.
Why?
I hate to talk about it. It sounds so prejudiced. He and Don Drame while they were in Africa, had a number of meetings in France, in Paris, with the French, and I don't know whether he actually flew with any of the French pilots, but he didn't respect them. He thought in general the men that he dealt with were weak. He felt that they were not informed as well as they should be. He just didn't respect them, and he was just not a big fan. He did want me to see. He wanted the four of us to see Paris because it was one of the major cities of the world, and he did take us there later.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute. So we're still on this trip. Did you see the windmills and
saw the windmills, but not as many as I expected. I thought I'd see them all over the place, but I didn't. Excuse me. I get such a dry throat. And the tulips were not blooming then. Remember there. When we were in Edam, we were walking, the five of us, along this little creek, and there were warehouses on one side. One of the warehouses was open, and it had cheese blocks, cheese rounds stored in it, and a gentleman was there standing in front. So he offered and motioned to you boys and handed you each a round of cheese, and we took a picture of you. Then we went to Volendam, and that was where the little boy supposedly put his thumb in the hole in the.
What was the name of that place?
Volendam.
Oh, Volendam, okay.
And then they were all dressed in old native clothes with the clogs, and that was fun to look at. I'm missing something that. Oh, when we were walking along the creek, wouldn't you know? No matter, it seems like where we went in the world, I would always end up finding a sign indicating the United States. And it was usually oil, gas. Here was a Shell sign on the side of the
Well,
creek.
Shell is not an American company.
Well, I always thought of it as an American company.
It's a Dutch company.
Is it?
Traditionally, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, there was a Shell sign.
Royal Dutch Shell, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Were people generally very pro-American? Very friendly to Americans?
The Dutch weren't. They were very stoic and very held back.
Standoffish.
Standoffish. The Swiss were friendly. I don't know. I
How'd you find the Germans?
friendly. Friendly.
Did Dad, because he bombed northern Italy, he bombed the Brenner Pass, he bombed targets in Germany. Did he have to get any special permission to go to these places? Do you know?
Not that I'm aware of. Okay. And in fact, the car we had American Armed Forces license plate on it, like our car did that we took over. We had to put that on. They were long, narrow license plate,
right.
Red. They were red. Interestingly enough, as we would go through borders, they would let us bypass and not even stop us. Okay. with that red license plate.
Interesting.
And the other cars from other places were always stopped and questioned and shown passports. They just always let us bypass them and go through. Interesting.
Did you always use the local currency, or could you use dollars? Do you remember?
I don't recall our changing our money into local currency, but we must have.
Mm-hmm.
We must have. I remember I was so proud of you boys on that trip. You were so young, and you were being dragged around so much, and it seemed like every other place we would stop, somehow, somewhere, we would be complimented on how well behaved you were, and that just made me so proud. I always wanted to say you ought to see him at home, but I didn't. Especially there was an occasion in Baden-Baden. Yeah, that's where it was. We went downstairs in the hotel to have dinner, and I always dressed you boys up. You always had your little sport coat or little suit on and a bow tie, and I always had you bathe and get all dressed up. And I always dressed nicely. We always dressed nicely as a family to go to dinner. And Dad usually, I remember he usually had you boys seat me at the table. I don't know whether you wouldn't remember that.
I do.
Do you?
Mm-hmm.
He'd have you seat me first before you all sat down. So he did that night, and while we were still eating, I think they were a German couple. I don't know what nationality, but they were foreign. An elderly couple who were having dinner got up to leave and came to our table, and they said in English, "We have been watching your family, and your boys are such polite, nice little boys." Oh, I was just so proud. I thought, well, they really are behaving well.
Yeah. Have them fooled.
Well, you did behave well when you were out.
Mm-hmm.
And it came from early when we had to travel so much in the Air Force in the States. Dad never let you get up out of your seat at the restaurant, as little as you were, and roam around and bother people. You always had to behave. Maybe he was too strict, I don't know.
Well, in officers' clubs, we were eating with people, around people who were Dad's colleagues and
Yeah.
him, and it was important that his children behaved.
Where he always said, people when they're out in a nice restaurant expect to enjoy themselves, and they don't want kids throwing food around or running around the tables. So he just felt that you needed to learn your manners, and you did. I missed something.
The lodgings were uniformly nice.
What?
The lodgings where we stayed were uniformly nice.
Most of them. Mm-hmm. Some of them were not as nice as others, but most of them were very nice. Mm-hmm. Oh, I remember. It was when we were in Locarno or Lugano. We stayed in a very simple little hostel, and we were upstairs, but in the basement part, it was basement kind of an upstairs and then a downstairs like basement where they had the bar and the big beer barrels and stuff. And I usually washed out your underclothes at night and got them clean because we were moving around a lot. And there was a beer garden down on the ground floor, and we had the lights off, and you boys had started to get ready for bed, and here we hear this wonderful singing, male voices singing, and we looked down, and here people had come from whatever they'd been doing to the beer garden, and they were having fun together and drinking beer and singing. It was so pretty. I remember sitting kind of halfway on the windowsill, and we were all looking and watching them and listening to them sing. I loved that night.
Where was this?
This was in, I thought it was in Lugano or Locarno.
Okay.
I thought it was it. I may be wrong.
Were they singing in German or Italian?
Well, I thought it was German, so that's why I hesitated.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we spent the night in, now it slipped my mind the name of the town near Wiesbaden. Starts with an H. Heidelberg. No, it wasn't Heidelberg. But I don't remember.
Didn't we go to like King Ludwig's castle or something like that?
Oh,
Palace?
yes. That was outside of. Oh, I missed telling you about that.
We go to Vienna?
That was outside of. After we left Oberammergau, I think. We went to Linderhof Castle. That was amazing. It was, and there was a lake in front with waterfalls. And then we took a bus trip out of there to Neuschwanstein. Now that's the castle you see so many times pictures of in your tourist offices, Neuschwanstein Castle. And you went to sleep in my lap on the bus. You remember, you're only about 2.5 or 3 years old. And so I said to Dad, you take the boys, George and Mike, up to the castle, because from the bus you had to go up farther to get to the castle and take the tour of the castle. So you and I didn't tour the castle, but we stayed in the bus because you were sound asleep. I didn't want to wake you up. Yeah, that was Neuschwanstein. Yeah, I missed that. There was so much we saw. So much.
Now, we also went to Madrid at one point, didn't we? But was that later?
No, we just landed in Madrid.
Oh, okay.
On the way up to Wiesbaden.
Oh, okay.
No, unfortunately, I would have liked to have seen Madrid, but we didn't. We almost were stationed there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So this particular trip we're talking about, can you remember anything else? So it was all pretty much Central Europe, Germany,
Yeah.
Holland, Switzerland, Austria, Northern Italy.
Luxembourg.
Luxembourg, yeah.
Belgium.
Food was good. Anybody ever get sick or anything?
No, everybody was well. But when we got back to Wiesbaden, I stayed there with you. Oh no, with George. And Dad flew. No, I stayed there with you and George. And Dad flew Mike back to Tucson, to Africa, and because the 30 days was up. But we had made an appointment for George to have surgery on his eyes by the USAF doctor there at the big hospital. So I stayed with the Ebies, you and I did, while George had his surgery.
Okay.
And then when he was in the hospital one or 2 nights, I forget how many, and then we flew back to Africa.
Now describe these courier flights. There was there one a week? How did that work?
Every week, City Slimane base sent a C-47, a Goodybird, up to Wiesbaden Air Force Base. They had a big base in Wiesbaden, and they always stayed at the Von Steuben Hotel. That was their headquarters. And Dad was one of the few, there were only a few pilots on the base that were checked out on the C-47. A pilot had to be checked out on a specific plane to be able to fly it. So Dad often was the pilot that took the families, and we were very isolated. If there was a problem with hello, sweetie pie. Hello, sweetie pie. How's my little boy, huh? How's my little boy? Lie down. Excuse us. There we are. He loves to cuddle.
So Dad would fly the courier?
Dad would take the courier up, and he'd purchase things that the government wanted, like new pianos for the officers' club. We could order things for the pilot to pick up for us, like Christmas time. Dad went out and bought the bicycles for you boys in Germany.
So the guys on the crew would collect lists from people.
Yeah,
People give
sometimes
lists.
they come in our house at 10 or 11 at night with requests before Dad flew up the next day.
For personal items.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And obviously the Air Force allowed this, permitted it.
Oh yeah.
Encouraged it. Yeah.
So Dad would end up with a long list of things to shop for when he got up there. And what he'd do, he'd hire a taxi after breakfast. He'd hire a taxi, and he'd spend the day going from place to place buying all the things that he had to take back to Germany.
And would the other crew members also have lists?
No, just the pilot, I think.
No. Right.
It wasn't a large crew anyway, I don't think. He brought back some pianos once, I remember. He brought back, if they had a problem with their, what kind of lens do you stick in your eye?
Contact lens?
Contact. If someone had trouble with their contact lenses, he'd take them up.
Did people have contact lenses then? No.
Yeah, they did. I'm sure they did. I may be wrong.
Probably cameras, things like that.
Oh yeah, anything that was broken had to be fixed.
Yeah.
You couldn't fix it where we were stationed.
But people want to buy cameras probably, or.
Oh yeah.
So Dad would. So there's this courier flight once a week.
Yeah.
Now would he fly up and then come back the next day?
No, fly up on Tuesday and came back on Thursday.
Okay, so you had a day to.
Okay. Right.
So he was often away Tuesday through Thursday. He was often away.
Oh yeah.
That was
I
true.
remember for the school carnival, we had ordered, or not ordered, we asked Dad to buy 300 pounds of bratwurst, and we were going to sell it at the carnival for food, and he picked it up and had it stored in the freezer at the hotel, I think, and was going to fly it back to the base. And something happened to the plane, and he couldn't take it off that day, so he was delayed. So he didn't get there till after the carnival, so we were stuck with 300 pounds of bratwurst. So Dad was so disgusted. I remember he called me from the flight line when he landed, and he said, I'm home, honey. I'll be there in a few minutes. And I said, did you bring the bratwurst? He said, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. So he got home with 300 pounds of bratwurst in the house, and we borrowed a scale, or somebody gave us a scale, and we packaged them in several pounds each package, and sold them individually to everybody.
You did. You and Dad did.
Dad did.
But he had paid for them?
Yeah, he had paid for them.
Jeez.
So we sold the bratwurst.
That's funny. I never heard that story.
And
you had to sell it fast because you didn't have enough capacity to freeze it.
oh no. Oh no. Well, we had that big carrier freezer over there. Yeah, we did.
So you would be flying up on that courier, and Dad would be flying the plane.
Quite often. Not every week, but quite often.
But when you went on it, sometimes you'd be flying it.
Oh yeah, when you and I flew on it when Dad was flying.
Right.
Yeah.
How did that feel, knowing your husband was flying the airplane? Did you have any special?
No, I just thought it was great. I felt safer.
Okay, I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
Because that could go either way. You could go. I mean, he's not a perfect human being. I understand his flaws.
Oh no, I thought
that could scare you.
I thought your father was pretty perfect.
Yeah, okay. So you felt actually safer because.
Oh, I felt safer.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so Tuesday and then Thursday back. Okay, interesting. Every week.
Not every week.
Yeah.
No, he didn't take it every week. There were a few other pilots.
But there was a courier every week.
Yeah, there was a courier every week.
Interesting.
If you had a medical problem that was more than pretty simple, you had to be taken up there.
Uh-huh. And what was the plane like? What was it like?
The Goody Bird?
Yeah,
It had regular seats in it, and it wasn't fancy.
Did it have like stewards who took care of you on the flight?
No.
They just strapped you in and you just...
Just put your
No food or refreshment.
Put your seatbelt on, and they always landed somewhere in Spain. It was either Torrejon what was the other one? Started with an A. There were two places in Spain you could stop and refuel. So they'd stop on the way up, and but we usually would stay on the plane. It was a quick stop, and so I never saw Spain.
When did you develop a fear of flying? Were you always afraid of flying?
No, when I flew from here to New York, from Tucson to New York with you boys, the first time to go to Africa, I wasn't afraid, and I got on the plane at McGuire Air Force Base and took off for Africa, and I wasn't afraid. The first time I became afraid was when we almost had a ditch at the Azore Islands. It really scared me to death, and it seemed like after that I just was afraid to get on an airplane.
Okay, so when you were making these courier flights...
Oh, I wasn't a happy camper.
Oh, okay. Even though you felt safer because Dad was flying, you still were not comfortable.
I have a 35 millimeter slide that Dad took of me in my seat on the C-47, and I look like I'm ready to die. I flew through so many times. You don't understand. I would clutch when Dad wasn't the pilot, and he was sitting next to me. Up to the very last flight I ever took, I'd clutch his hand at takeoff, and we'd start down the runway, and I'd always have us pray before as the engines are revving and we're getting ready. And then I would just squeeze his hand like that as we took off, and I was that way until we would get airborne and get to our altitude, and then I could kind of relax. And I did not like to fly. I did not like it. The first time I flew to China, that was such a long flight, and I was just.
So this was your first trip to Europe, and then you said just before we left Morocco to return to the U.S., you took another trip to Europe?
Just before we returned to the U.S.
Where'd you go?
It was in February of '58.
Now you're flying up to Wiesbaden again?
Yes.
So this is always taking the courier to Wiesbaden?
And then doing whatever we were going to do from there.
Okay.
And Dad had made reservations for us in London and in Paris. And we flew into Wiesbaden.
Don't cover the microphone.
Oh yeah. We flew into Wiesbaden and stayed overnight. I don't remember whether we stayed longer than overnight. But then we took a British Overseas...
BOAC.
BOAC. We took a BOAC plane from Wiesbaden to across the Channel. And that's the first time in Dad's life he had ever actually seen the White Cliffs of Dover without... He had never seen them because it had always been overcast when he flew in. And he said, "Oh, I get to see the Cliffs of Dover." And we landed at... where did we land? I don't remember where we landed. Whether it was Heathrow? Must have been. Not Gatwick, I don't think. I think it was Heathrow. And
now, on these planes, is Dad flying the planes?
Oh no, this is.
No, I'm talking about to Wiesbaden.
To Wiesbaden?
Yeah.
No, on that trip I don't know whether he was or not.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. But on the first one he was?
Yeah.
So he's up in the cockpit and you're back there with the boys?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So now you're in London?
We're in London, and he had made reservations for 10 days at the, what was the name? Columbia House.
Now is this on our way out of Africa?
No, we flew into Wiesbaden.
No, but then are you going back to Africa afterwards, or are you going on to the U.S. afterwards?
Oh no, we're going back to Africa.
Okay.
This is in February. We went back to the U.S. in June.
Okay, so this is your last hurrah.
So this is for February, 10-day trip.
Okay.
So he had booked a week, I think it was, at the Columbia House in London. Now the Columbia House, I have a slide of that, was a I don't know what the situation there, but anyway, the United States Air Force, or the United States government, it was an officers' club, where officers from the United States could stay with their families. It was a nice big place, and so we stayed there for a week, and we took tours, three or four tours of different parts of London, and visited different places, and went out to my mind went blank, where the Queen would go to she had a castle in a town. It starts with a W.
You didn't go to, well, she had, not, you didn't go to Wales, obviously.
No.
Doesn't matter, go ahead.
Anyway, we went there on a bus, and Dad was great for taking tours of every place we went. And then he'd say, if we find something we really like, we can go back on our own. But we can see more of where we are if we take a tour. Then we left. We went to a stage show in London. I forget what it was. And during the intermission, when they serve tea or drinks, and you can go out into the lobby or wherever it is, we ended up meeting an American lady. She was much older than we were, probably our mother's generation, and her British husband. And she had married a Brit and settled in England with him, and was delighted to meet us and to talk to us. And she wanted to know about our children. I forget, we must have gotten a babysitter at the hotel, because it was late at night and you weren't with us. And they invited us to their country home for the weekend with our children. They said, we'd love to meet your children, and we'd love to have you come spend the weekend at our country home. And we said, we'd love to do it, but we're going to be gone. We can't do it. And we were disappointed we couldn't do that. But they said, now at the end of the play, we'd like to take you to dinner.
Wow.
So they did.
Wow.
And that was nice.
You remember their name?
No.
Interesting.
No, I did have the menu at the restaurant where we were, but with our move, it got tossed out, I'm sure, because I threw out all that stuff. But that was a lovely evening. Then we flew to Paris on Air France, and no, we flew to Paris on Lufthansa, the German airline, and that's when the pilot asked me to let you come up to the cockpit.
Oh.
It was either that or the Air France plane. It was Lufthansa, I think. And we landed in Paris in snow.
Oh.
It was snowing at Orly Field. And we had reservations at a hotel. Then that evening we went to some little restaurant. It wasn't a big one or important one, but we went to eat some supper. And Dad and I looked across the table at you, and we just went, oh no. Your glands were all swollen.
Oh.
And we thought, months. Oh no. What do we do now? So Dad said, let's get a taxi, get you guys back to the hotel. I've got to take Frank to the American hospital. We've got to find out what's going on. So he got us back to the hotel, up in our room, and he put you in the taxi, and he said, take me to the American hospital. There was one called the American hospital. And of course, it was closed, and he had to get the officer of the day to open it. And we just knew you had mumps, but you didn't. you had a cold infection and it settled in your glands.
Oh, okay.
And
I wasn't storing cookies in my throat or anything.
you weren't contagious. That was what we were afraid of. And so you had a little overcoat that I bought for you, and it was a real warm little overcoat, and you had a hat, little cap. So we just bundled you up that weekend and took you on the tour buses with us, and that was that took care of that. And of course it was cold and it was dripping snow the whole weekend. But we went up to Sacre-Cœur and Montmartre, and we toured the inside of Notre Dame and
The Eiffel Tower.
the Eiffel Tower, and we went past the Louvre. Unfortunately, didn't go into the Louvre. I would have liked to have done that, but we didn't have time.
Yeah, 3 little boys in the Louvre would not.
No, that didn't sound very practical. They couldn't have cared less about
That's the Mona Lisa. The
Mona-
what?
They couldn't have cared less about Mona Lisa. And we went to the Needle, and we went to, Dad took me to he wanted to take me to the Follies. Oh, he thought that would be so much fun to take me to the Follies. See all the bare-breasted women walking around. Just what I wanted to do. But the Follies were closed for renovation.
Okay.
So he said, okay, I still have to take you to something special in Paris. He was so sweet. And so he said, I made reservations at the Lido, which was the second tourist attraction to go have dinner and a floor show. So we went to the Lido and had a delicious French dinner. And then I noticed these tall, stately women with beautiful figures walking around, just very subtly walking around the air, everything. And all of a sudden I turned to Dad and I said, oh, talk about little country girl. I said, honey, they don't have anything on up of their waist. They're bare-breasted. He says, yeah. And I said, did you know that? And he said, yes. He said, that's what this is all about. So, and laughed. And they put on a floor show that was very nice. But that was an eye-opener for little Avonelle. But that was an interesting evening.
Now, you had babysitters for us?
Uh-huh. An elderly lady came and sat in the bed in the hotel rooms with you boys until we got back. I can't imagine I let them do that, but I guess that was very common, and they were all screened, and they assured us they were safe. They were elderly women, and you boys were always so good when we traveled. But anyway, I can't think of anything else.
So did you head back to Wiesbaden in order to get back?
Yeah, then we went back to Wiesbaden, and then got the Goonie Bird back to
Okay, back to, and then that was February, then we left City Slimane in
June on our wedding anniversary.
Oh, okay. Which is tomorrow.
Which is tomorrow.
Oh, your 75th.
June 27th.
Now, getting back to Morocco, didn't Curtis LeMay come through?
While Dad and Mike were back in Morocco, and you and George and I were in Wiesbaden for the surgery, Dad had taken Mike to the Officers Club for breakfast or something, and Curtis LeMay was sitting there having breakfast. So Dad took Mike over to his table and he said, sir, I don't like to intrude, but I'd like my son to meet you. And so they stood there and talked for a few minutes. General Curtis LeMay, quite a man.
Yeah. Any other famous people come through Morocco?
Oh, I'm sure that, and I didn't know.
That you met or had a chance to meet?
No.
Okay.
No. We did in Omaha.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you're getting ready to pack up and leave. Initially you were going to go to Madrid, the 15th Air Force headquarters, but then that got changed to Offutt Air Force Base. right? And by this time, the the Air Force had provided you with free housing, right?
Well, our entire time in the Air Force, we could have had base housing,
Mm-hmm.
but Dad preferred not to.
But in this case, you did have base housing. In City Sylvain, you did have.
Oh, in
base
City
housing.
Sylvain, oh yes,
Right.
that was important for us.
Right. So, were you able to save some money?
Oh yes, that was the first time and only time we were able to save any money.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're heading to Omaha with a little bit of cash.
Yeah, it was a savings account.
Nice. Okay.
Thank goodness, because our move is expensive.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Duke.
Duke?
Yeah, Duke.
Okay. When we got to Morocco, lo and behold, here's Bud and Esther Williams,
Esther Williams.
Miller,
Yeah.
and their 3 kids. 2 girls from her first marriage, and her husband had died during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And then little Tony that they had just had, he was an infant when we ran into them. But Bud had grown up in Tucson, and my mother and father had known his family. But we all went through school together, and he was a rascal. And they finally said to him, you either go to jail or you join the military. So he said...
Not unusual for teenage boys at that time, not terribly unusual. Yeah.
And so Bud said, I'll go in the military. And he was a hero. And absolutely, he never made more than, I forget what his rank was, very low. He wasn't an officer, he was a non-com. But Dad had run into him before I came over with you boys. And I arrived just 3 weeks before Christmas, so Bud and Esther invited us to have Christmas dinner with them, which you usually didn't as officers and non-coms, but we did. We always did.
Go ahead. Just ignore that. Just ignore it.
Where were we? Bud he was a...
Duke, we're talking about Duke.
Oh, well, they had Duke. They owned Duke. They had inherited Duke or bought him or something and had brought him to Morocco. Duke was a large-size boxer. He wasn't a small one. But he was old. He was about 11 years old and toothless, totally harmless, kind, sweet dog. And they got transferred to Japan the year before we left Morocco. So they couldn't take a dog that old to Japan because they'd have to quarantine him for, I think, a long time. Anyway, they found the need to leave him in Morocco. And so they asked if we'd like to have him, and of course we would. And we took him. And he was a delight that last year in Morocco. The Arabs were scared to death of him. Scared to death. And we had a little bamboo fence around the back of our house for you boys to play in with a little covering. And Duke would wander around that the edge of the fence, look out. And the Arabs would just, when he'd be outside, they'd just stay away. And he couldn't have done a thing to them. He was totally harmless. But he loved big rocks. And so when we would let him loose, when nobody was around, he would find the nearest bunch of rocks and start trying to move them. He loved big rocks.
He'd start trying to move them around?
Oh yeah, he'd start nosing them and trying to push them around. I don't know what he thought they were, turtles or something. But he was a delight to have. But at the end of the year, when we had to move and come back to the States, we said, what do we do with dear little Duke? We just loved him. Well, the Murdochs lived next door, Doris and I forget her husband's name. And we said, would you like to take Duke? Oh, they'd love it, so they took Duke.
So Duke was the Morocco. So we only had him that last year.
That last year.
Yeah.
And Sandy just hated us for, I don't know how long. That was one of their daughters. because she thought we had taken her dog,
Sandy Miller.
Sandy Miller.
Yeah.
She laughed about it later, but she said, I was so mad you guys took my
She
dog.
should have been mad at her father.
Yeah.
They weren't taking it to Japan.
Yeah.
All right, so you're packing up to head off to Omaha. What's that process like?
What's the process like?
Yeah, just pack with the
I
Air
don't know,
Force,
Frank.
The Air Force just send people in to pack up and.
Frank, your mother is weird. Things happen and they just day by day, and we did it and we didn't even think about it. And of course, your father was so efficient. I can't explain. Where some wives went crazy because they had to do all the personal packing and everything, Dad did all of that. I helped, of course, did whatever he wanted me to do, but he liked doing things, and so the Air Force would bring in the packers, and whatever you wanted to keep and pack yourself, you were allowed so many 100 pounds on the Air Force plane going back, and everything else had to be sent by ship, and so Dad and I would decide what to what to take and what not to take, and they'd come in and pack us up, and you hope that you got it when you open up the boxes, and we did. We always got it.
So you flew from City Slimane. So Mike was able to end his year in school.
Yeah.
Right, and George.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then you have 30 days leave?
Yes, 30 days leave, and we wanted to go. Well, that comes along in a minute. We were going to have 30 days leave, so Mom and Dad decided they would drive back to New York and New Jersey and meet us in New York. We would land at McGuire Air Force Base, New Jersey, Trenton, New Jersey, and we'd come in by bus to New York City, and they would meet us in New York City. And they made reservations at a lovely hotel in New York City, forget the name. And we spent 3 or 4 days with Mom and Dad before we headed for Washington, D.C., and Mom and Dad headed back to Tucson. And then we drove from Washington, D.C. back to Tucson.
So Grandma and Grandpa went all the way to New York just for a few days, to spend a few days with you?
Well, I don't know whether they did something before we got there. I don't know.
And did they fly there or drive there?
No, they drove there.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
It's a long drive back.
Yeah.
And then why didn't they go with you to Washington, D.C.?
Well, I guess they had other things to do, or they weren't interested in going to Washington.
And why did you go to Washington, D.C.?
Dad wanted Everett's people to work on our car before we started driving across the United States.
So the car was already back?
At Brooklyn Navy Yard.
So you shipped it ahead of time?
Uh-huh, 6 weeks ahead.
Okay, so what were you doing for transportation in cities?
Bicycles.
Really?
Dad and I rode bicycles.
And he just carpooled to the base?
Well, he rode a bicycle.
Well, he was on the base at this time.
We're living on the base.
Okay, he didn't have a motorbike at this time?
No, that was later. Or that was earlier.
Okay, so how'd you go to the commissary? How'd you get food?
I don't recall.
Oh.
I don't recall how we did. I don't recall.
Okay, so now the Pontiac's in D.C. at Everett.
And we drove. Dad picked up the car at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and then we drove to Washington, D.C., and stayed with Everett and Dorothy at their place. And while we were there, waiting for his people to take care of our car, they wanted us to go to the beach, their beach home, for a couple of days. So we went out to Rehoboth Beach and spent a couple of days with Dorothy and Everett, and that was nice. And then we came back and picked up the car and started. Let's see, we got as far as Norfolk, Virginia, and the air conditioner went out.
This is 1958?
Uh-huh.
58. The air AC goes out in Virginia.
Uh-huh.
Now, where are you headed? Where are you going?
Well, we're headed for home.
Tucson.
Tucson.
Where we're sitting right now.
So we went into this big garage in Norfolk to have them see if they could fix the air conditioner. And Dad left you three boys and myself in the car while he went into their office to tell them that we had arrived and we'd like to have our car looked at because he thinks the air conditioners were broken. And while he's in there, a black man approaches, apparently he worked there, approaches the car. And he looks at our license plate. He's just kind of looking around the car, outside the car. And he comes to the window and he said, "Ma'am, where are you all from? You have a strange license plate." We still had the U.S. Forces in Europe license plate on the front of our car.
That's the license plate you had in City Slimane?
In City Slimane.
Okay. The
red license plate. We hadn't had it changed yet. And he said, "Ma'am, where are you all from? You have a strange license plate." I said, "We just got back from Africa." He said, "Did you drive all the way?" I have never been so shocked at all. He looked right at me and he said, "Ma'am, did you drive all the way?" And I said, "Well, no, sir. We flew over the water and then picked the car up." "Oh," he says. That was so funny. And then we got it fixed. Didn't take long. I don't know what was wrong. Maybe it wasn't real major, I don't know. And then we drove home and stayed for 30 days. And that's when Dad decided that you boys were getting big enough that you needed to know how to camp. So he went to the big barn in Tucson.
The big barn.
I think it was called the big barn, or something barn. And oh my gosh, he bought all this camping stuff. Oh my goodness. He bought 5 cots. He bought a 5-man tent, or big enough for 5 tent. He bought bedrolls.
Sounds like it's time, he thought it was time for you to learn how to camp too.
I had never slept outside of my house in my life. I had not been a Girl Scout. I had never camped. Never slept in a bedroll. Never cooked outside. I knew nothing about it and wasn't interested in knowing anything about it. But I knew it was something we had to do. I always trusted Dad. So he put it this way to me. He said, "Honey, the boys really need to learn how to camp, and I want to camp with them." But he says, "I'm not going without you." He said, we won't go if you won't go." And I said, "Sure, I'll go." And so we drove up to Flagstaff the first night on our trip back to Omaha. And
so now we're finished with the time in Tucson. We're heading to Omaha.
Yeah.
And first stop was Flagstaff to go camping.
Well, we spent the night there because Maynard and Margaret were going to summer school at NAU.
Oh, okay.
And the girls. We wanted to spend overnight with them. So we found our campground. And Dad said we need to hang out our bedrolls so they can air while we're in Flagstaff. Oh, that's just fine, except it poured down rain while we were there. And the bedrolls got soaked. So Dad said, "Well, I guess we have to borrow some blankets from Maynard and Margaret." So we went back to Flagstaff and got some blankets. And that was our first night out. And I thought,
blankets.
And I thought, this is just great.
Now Dad's putting up the tent by himself?
Uh-huh.
A 5-person tent by
Yeah,
himself?
it wasn't easy.
No.
It wasn't easy, but he tackled everything. He tackled everything.
And we're all sitting there watching him while he's putting up the
And,
tent.
and we're trying to get the older boys to help, which wasn't too successful, but anyway, and I'm sure if I'd opened my ears a little better, I would have heard some choice words. But anyway, we slept that night in the tent, and then we packed up the next day and off we went.
Oh, no, not so fast. So the next day, though, did you fix a meal the next
I'm
morning?
sure I did. I'm sure I did, but I don't remember what it was.
So he had the whole Coleman stove.
Oh yeah, we had a Coleman stove with 2 burners, and we had lanterns, and we had flashlights. We had the works. We were all outfitted, and so off we went. And I forget the different stops we made, Frank. I'm sorry, can't remember those, but we kept all that camping equipment. And while we were in Omaha, we went up into Minnesota and camped several times.
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But all that stuff fit in the Pontiac along with all of your
Oh,
luggage and everything
he
else?
found a way to yeah.
You weren't hauling a trailer or anything?
I'm trying to think if we had a trailer. I don't remember a trailer then.
But
We may have, but I don't remember.
I think you must have, because I mean, you had all your personal effects. None of it was going in the car because the car was filled with people.
Yeah.
So all you had was the trunk. And there's no way you had all your luggage plus all that camping gear in the
I know
trunk.
we had a little 2-wheel trailer when we were stationed in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Yeah, you probably kept it in Tucson, and you probably
I don't remember.
you
That's a blank in
yeah,
my mind.
No, there's no way you had all that stuff in the trunk of a Pontiac.
I don't remember.
But the drive from Washington D.C. to Tucson, I mean, did we do anything interesting? Stop
No,
anywhere?
we just drove
kinda
straight there
kinda-
because we were anxious to get
Yeah,
to Tucson.
And then in Tucson, you're in Tucson for several weeks. What was that like?
Oh, it was great just being with the family.
Mm-hmm.
Mom, fabulous cook. And of course, your grandparents couldn't do enough for their children.
Mm-hmm.
And when their children came home, it was all special.
And we stayed with them.
Oh yeah, stayed with Mom and Dad.
Uh-huh. And-
Saw Aunt and Uncle Maynard.
Mhm.
We had Onley and Paul,
Mhm.
and we had friends here that we had grown up with. But mostly, when we were home, we just stayed at home and visited with Mom and Dad.
And Tom and Estelle and George and Mildred, were they in Tucson then?
George and Mildred had come to Tucson the month that I flew you boys to Africa, so yes, they were here. Oh yes, I remember now that triggers my memory. They had us out for a big party at their house with some of our friends, and of course Dad was always ready to show his slides.
Yeah.
That was funny. He was always unpacking. Would you like to see our pictures from Europe and Africa? And he had his spiel all ready to talk about it.
Well, yeah. He also had movies. He had movies and slides. Right?
Movies and slides, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we had a show.
Oh, yeah, no.
Dad had a show. It was so cute.
He was a multimedia guy.
George your Uncle George went sound asleep on the steps of Mom and Dad's house as he showed all this stuff. Sound asleep. That just thrilled her to death. Oh, we stopped at Tom and Estelle's in Houston on the way back and showed our slides.
I have those slides sitting in my house in Henderson, by the way.
Yeah, you do. You have them all there. I loved being your dad's wife. I loved it.
So you're okay, and so your time in Tucson is done, and we're off to Omaha via Flagstaff. Did we camp elsewhere on the trip back to Omaha?
Yeah, and I can't remember, but not too many places because you couldn't find good campgrounds some places.
And what are you thinking as you're camping for the first time ever? What's going through your mind?
I'm just trying to deal with it, not thinking about anything but getting through it.
So we arrive in Omaha in July.
Let's see, we left June 27th in July. probably the end of July or early August. I don't recall just when.
Yeah. Nice and warm and humid.
And we had, oh yes, it was hot. And we had to find a place to live.
Yeah, we'll get to that in our next session. So I just want to get us to Omaha, right?
Well, we're in Omaha.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, this has been great.
A lot of memories.
We'll talk later.
See you later.
Love you.
I love you, honey.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.